shook him by the shoulders and said, "Say la ilaha illallah." The man says, "What does that mean?" He says, "Say it, la ilaha illallah." The man says, "La ilaha illallah." The man grabs him and says, "Welcome to Islam, brother." The man doesn't know what he said, he doesn't know what's going on, he thinks, this man is insane, I'm getting out of here. Similar, many stories like that. I know an American woman who came to Islam, alhamdulillah, but first time she went to a mosque, somebody came running over to her and said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "I came to find out something about Islam." He said, "Well, you have to go home and throw away your wine." First thing. Met people who said, in fact, this Steve Johnson, who used to be a Jesuit priest, he was scared to go into the mosque. He said he walked up and down on the street in front of it for a long time, and finally he went up and he opened the door, and somebody came running over to him and said, "Are you clean?" He says, "I took a shower this morning." "Well, it should be okay then. What do you want?" There's all kinds of people who really make it difficult for the newly interested people in Islam. The first revelation was not throw away your wine, or all these other things that people sometimes they want to start there. You know, answer a man's questions and bring them along, see what next. You don't start with the whole thing. There's a group in New Zealand who stand guard at the mosque in Auckland, and when a New Zealander comes and he wants to know about Islam, they tell him, "Go away, it's not for non-Muslims, it's for Muslims." There was one New Zealander who insisted. He said, "But I want to know about Islam." So they said, "All right, come inside and make 17 rakat, and then maybe I'll tell you something." That goes on. What objections did you have? Yeah, I'm not sure what is meant by that. Maybe sometimes... Oh, what opposition or something like that?
I mean, when in Christianity society you became a Muslim, and from the society that you live, did you have any special problems, that is objection of changing?
No.
Most people don't really. I think sometimes it seems Muslims have an idea. Sometimes they ask me, they say, "What do you miss most about what you used to have now that you are a Muslim?" Well, if there was something I missed, probably I'd still be there. You know, in other words, it was not like I had a whole lot of... It's not like there's a whole lot of fun and wonderful things outside Islam, and when you become a Muslim, you really miss them. There aren't things like that, if you really know which things are worthwhile. As to family pressure, I didn't have any problem. My family's quite receptive. That's not always the case, but my wife had the biggest difficulty there. Her parents caused her a lot of grief for a time, and then they started to realize, well, she's different than she used to be, and we have grandchildren now, and you know, this started to take effect. In fact, it finally reached a point after a couple of years. One day her mother said to her, the sun was about to go down. And her mother said, "Don't you have a prayer you're supposed to say before the sun goes down?" My wife says, "Well, there's still time." She said, "Well, you don't want to miss it." See, that's a kind of very slowly that the attitude changes. A lot of people go through that, but that's not always the case. Some people have a very hard time. Maybe you can explain what you mean here. Since you were to change all your Christian ideas, how do you solve them? How do you solve these difficulties? I think, yeah, maybe we've already kind of...
You would have had many problems.
No, not then. I've been solving those for 15 years. So I used to engage in it was like a hobby, I suppose, but I used to, in the business I was in, I'd go from city to city moving. And when I get to a new city, I'd take out the telephone directory and I'd look up all the priests and ministers. And I'd give them a telephone call and say, "Would you mind if I came and talked to you?" And of course they're delighted, you see. So I'd go over and basically I'd be saying, "Why is it that you say this, but your own book says that?" And I used to love to battle with them this way. So I was already fighting this battle when I found out this is what Muslims believe. No problem. No, this is what I used to tell them all the time, so they didn't have to overcome some kind of a thing. But I would stress that there are a lot of things Muslims have to be understanding of new Muslims. Sometimes they carry a lot of ideas along with them which they can't help, and you've got to try and slowly try to show people, well, but your attitude is still back there, and the new attitude ought to be this, and you try and turn this thing around. An example is Islamic law. How does it work? Which things are good, which things are bad? broadly speaking, the psychology is in Christianity, if you're in doubt about something, it must be bad. Forbid it, basically speaking, because the world is evil. So if you're not sure if it's good or bad, it must be bad. In Islam, it works the other way. See, if your conscience tells you that you worry about doing it, well, then you ought to leave it. But when it comes to making a law about it, if you don't know, then it must be all right. Because whereas in Christianity, you have a short list of the things that are permitted, in Islam, you have a short list of the things that are forbidden. You see? So if it's not on the forbidden list, well, it must be all right. Unless it's really spelled out or the matter is made very clear, then it must be permitted. At least it's not harmful to you. So sometimes people have still got the old attitude, and they're in fear of a lot of things. And sometimes I remember hearing one man one time, it was explained to him about something. He'd been a Muslim for 2 or 3 years. And when something was explained to him, it was so exciting to him. He hit the floor like that. He says, "Now I believe." It was like he discovered Islam all over again today, because this was such a big jump from an attitude that he didn't realize he'd been carrying around like a heavy weight all this time.
You were a Christian before you embraced Islam. Were you? You were a Christian before you embraced Islam. Were you?
Yes.
As a Christian, you must have believed Jesus is Son of God. As a Christian, you must have believed Jesus is Son of God. As Muslims, we believe He is also an apostle like Prophet Muhammad. How do you distinguish before embracing Islam? How do you get enlightenment that Jesus is prophet, not a Son of God?
Okay, well, in the first place, not all Christians believe Jesus is the Son of God. And while I was raised, and all my education right through university was in Catholic schools, I left that because I didn't believe it. Since I was maybe 14, didn't believe that and finished the rest of the education. So it wasn't, that was the thing I figured out when I was 14, okay? It's largely because of, I used to get perfect grades on religious exams. And then one day it occurred to me, the reason that the grade is high is because every word on here is what the teacher said. I gave him back what he said. That's why he likes it. That doesn't mean it's true. It just means I remember what he said. It's time for the exam. I write it down and give it to him. He puts a big love note on my paper. Brilliant student. It's his words. No wonder he thinks it's intelligent. That's when it occurred to me that just because somebody explains it nicely doesn't mean it's true. So then, many years after that, it's not a problem to set aside some kind of an idea, which I've set aside since a long, long time ago. Do you or did you believe that Jesus was crucified? Yes, I suppose at one time I used to think. I never tried to defend that because it just seemed to me it was never in dispute. I always thought, it must have been crucified. Who would say otherwise? But it came to my attention that, as a matter of fact, history will tell you that's in doubt, very much doubt. The Christian church will tell you it's in doubt. There's a standard book which is studied by virtually anybody who studies for the Christian ministry, Catholic or Protestant. If he studies to be a minister or priest, he studies J.N.D. Kelly's Early Christian Doctrine. So they all read it. And in that book, Early Christian Doctrine, it tells you, since the first century, there have been Christians who said Jesus wasn't crucified. When that kind of thing came to my attention, I realized, well, then it's not this neat, solid, airtight story that I've always heard, because even in their own information, they'll tell you it's been in doubt since the first time anybody talked about it. It's been in doubt within the Christian community. So that's when I started to re-examine that and look at it again. How does the Bible refer to the descending of Jesus in the future? Well, you'll get many different versions of that depending on which church you ask. A lot of them have different ideas about it, so you have to ask them what they think the Bible says about it. The Protestants fall into sort of two groups